as Dave said, FAO and World Fish have quite a history of collaboration. And this collaboration has recently been formalized actually through the signing of a memorandum of understanding between these two organizations. So on 11th July, on the occasion of the FAO Committee on Fisheries, Gareth was in Rome with us, and there was a signing ceremony for this memorandum of understanding between FAO and World Fish. In FAO, we have a contact point for this arrangement. It's our colleague Simon Franch-Smith. Some of you may know him. He used to be our regional officer here in the Bangkok office, responsible for Asia for FAO. I'm just going to walk you very briefly through the four major components of the provisional work plan under this memorandum of understanding. And focal points for various areas of work are in the room here and know the details better than that. And then Xavier will talk a little bit more about one of the specific activities in that context. So one area that has been identified as an area for collaboration between FAO and World Fish is on value chains and nutrition. And what is planned to be done in that context are foresight studies and analysis to demonstrate the impact at all levels of inadequate investment in promoting fish and nutrition. Also more specifically, collaboration on food and fish loss databases, but also work in relation to increasing economic benefits for women in fish value chains. Cynthia is a lead for that, while Shakuntala is involved in the other more food security for nutrition related activities from the side of World Fish, and also in relation to all of this awareness raising and communication of results of fish and nutrition. So also taking advantage of the capacities and the outreach of both organizations to engage more in spaces that deal specifically with the issues of food security and nutrition, like, for example, the committee, a global committee on world food security. Another area for collaboration is to link research to policy advice for sustainable aquaculture systems. This, obviously, Mike is heavily involved, but also some other colleagues from your aquaculture team here. Work in that context will look at the outcomes of the State of the World Aquatic Genetic Resources report, but also more foresight studies and planning tools for aquaculture development, be it in relation to spatial development, how to deal with some of the diseases and other aspects. And also specific research pilots to provide aquaculture policy advice at country level. So there's also direct involvement with a network of World Fish country offices, and the participation in joint panels of meetings convened by the partners. Another kind of overarching area is to increase the collaboration around advocacy and communication. The mandates of World Fish and FAO are very closely aligned. So we're really natural partners in bringing fisheries and aquaculture more into the food security nutrition agenda in particular, but also around water issues and other related topics. So this is really about identifying opportunities to participate together in panel sessions or convene events or sessions, or also to prepare materials together that promote fisheries and aquaculture in our common areas of interest. Lastly, but this obviously for us is the most important area to speak about today, is a collaboration in relation to supporting resilient small-scale fisheries. And one of the activities identified in this area is a cooperation on this new study called the Illuminating Hidden Harvests. And Javier is going to introduce that in more detail, what we plan to do there. Another area of work here is support the implementation and monitoring of the small-scale fisheries guidelines, but also to go a little bit beyond the fisheries sector. The area of work that was identified is to have collaborative work on integration of fish systems into water management, and that's particularly important also in the context of inland fisheries, for example. Next one, present and convene joint sessions on the illuminating hidden harvest outcomes that relates to the first bullet here and the communication component of it. And then also research pilots to provide small-scale fisheries policy advice to countries. Again, that will also involve a different level of country offices. And I should also say that we already have other ongoing projects with World Fish in the context of small-scale fisheries. We are co-organizing an expert workshop on the use of information communication technology for small-scale fisheries in Asia, for example. There's a series of case studies on co-management, also drawn from Asian countries, that is being developed to inform what works, what doesn't work in co-management. So there are a number of other activities that are already happening. But now for this session here, we will give you a little bit more background on this collaboration, on the cooperation on illuminating hidden harvests. And with that, I pass the microphone on to Javier.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you, but we hope we're going to also have time for hearing from you, any questions or comments. So I'll make a very brief presentation. Hopefully many of you have heard or read these statistics, either when writing papers or reading papers on small-scale fisheries. The level of employment that small-scale fisheries provides around the world is very high. Half of them are women. Small-scale fisheries employs more than any other ocean industries combined. And most of fishers live in developing countries, as you might know, and produce as much fish as industrialized fisheries for direct consumption. That information came from the Regional Hidden Harvest Study, published in 2012. It was a collaboration between FAO and the World Bank. And while, am I missing, and World Fish, sorry. Thank you, very important. And all that study, as my colleagues here can speak much better than I can, and I'll introduce them in a second, produce very, very important information to give us a global perspective of small-scale fisheries, but a lot of questions remain, such as what is the importance of small-scale fisheries for food and nutrition security? What is its importance for local economies and poverty eradication? What are the overall benefits and impacts generated by small-scale fisheries distributed, and how can they be enhanced? And some related to environmental impacts, such as what kind of environmental impacts they produce and how can they be managed sustainably. So those are very broad and very important questions that remain, and are most of the motivation for this new study is to start making headway in addressing those questions. So I'm here presenting in behalf of the core team, and we have several members of the core team here, as Nicole Franz, Dave, Lena Westlund, who was part of the first Hidden Harvest study, along with Dave, and Shakuntala. So if you have more questions about the approach than time I have here today, feel free to talk to any of us. We're here until the rest of the day, I think. And so there's other members that are not here, but as Dave mentioned, it's a collaboration between these three organizations. And so again, the ultimate goal is there's three main points or three main goals for the study. One is to develop rigorous methods for data collection and synthesis that can be used in the future in many different contexts, whether at the country level or to do global synthesis as we aim to do here, but also to generate scientifically sound evidence to fill the knowledge gaps around benefits and impacts. Again, we want to know what are the benefits that small-scale fisheries produce to society, to the environment, and the impacts as well. And finally, create the imperative for incorporation of small-scale fisheries policies and actions. In other words, provide the argument that is lacking often at the global level of when the question comes of why small-scale fisheries matter. And so one example of these policies is, of course, the small-scale fisheries guidelines, which some of you might be familiar with. Okay, so how have we organized this study? Just briefly, the way we organize the study is we are not only interested in understanding the contributions of small-scale fisheries in terms of harvesting to 3 different dimensions of sustainable development as they are environmental, economic, social, and governance, and how they relate to the sustainable development goals. We're not only interested in harvesting, but also how pre-harvesting and post-harvesting activities contribute. Because if you think about it, the way we have defined what fishing is usually a male on a boat harvesting. And that's a pretty narrow definition of what fishing is. Fishing often doesn't include a male, doesn't include a boat, and doesn't include harvesting. So unless we start generating systematic data about pre-harvesting and post-harvesting activities, those definitions and the ways policies are done around fishing are going to continue to be very narrow. So not only we're interested in expanding the definition like that, but also looking at inland fisheries as opposed to only marine small-scale fisheries. So that's broadly how we are organizing the study in terms of content, but more specifically, we want to generate, we're going to divide the data collection in 2 main parts. One, we want to have a global synthesis of the contributions of small-scale fisheries in terms, as I said, environmental, economic, social, and governance, and provide large numbers about these contributions, but also we understand that some of the contributions of small-scale fisheries cannot be represented numerically through a global synthesis, but they need to be represented thematically. For instance, the role of physical displacement, or certain aspects related to gender, for which is not relevant, probably not desirable to just speak about numbers. So we're taking very different approaches to get data at the global level and to represent thematically issues that are important on small-scale fisheries. To do the global synthesis, we're engaging with in-country experts, and I can tell you from our meeting last week that we are expecting to be able to engage with between 40 and 50 countries. And WorldFish, it's going to be working particularly on the countries mentioned there: Malawi, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Zambia, Myanmar, and Egypt. Now, in terms of the thematic studies part of well, here we have developed methods that are, we have developed a handbook of very rigorous methodology that we are going to be training in-country experts to collect the data on, and we are, the idea is to collect the best available data in country at the national level, which can be official or not, and then do a global synthesis. Now, in terms of the thematic studies, I want to give you just a little bit of a taste of what we're thinking in terms of thematic studies. We have organized the thematic studies around clusters, 4 clusters. The first one is the economic, and what we have kind of in the orbit of the word economic are just examples of themes that we have thought about as being important, but we are in the process of getting feedback from the community at large on other themes that might be important. So last week we were at the Small Scale Fisheries World Congress, and I gave this same presentation on behalf of the core team to get feedback on what other themes might be important, and particularly who in terms of authors might be interested in contributing to these themes. So this is an example of the economic theme, and an example of one question we would like to answer that has to do with the economic dimension. What is the economic importance of small-scale fisheries at subnational levels? Because we think one problem is when small-scale fisheries are compared to GDP, they're always going to lose against agriculture or other primary economic activities. But small-scale fisheries tend to be very important in coastal regions where there's not the possibility of agriculture, there's not the possibility of other economic primary activities. And that kind of study is not available. In terms of environmental, there's a number of topics, as you would expect, in terms of bycatch, in terms of stock assessment. And so one example of the question we want to answer is there. What is the impact of small-scale fisheries on the environment through carbon footprint, water usage, and processing and pollution? Again, just to remind you that we are not only interested in the benefits, but also the impacts of small-scale fisheries. An example of the social cluster, an obvious, very important element is the role of women in all different aspects of fishing, but also, cultural values, the role of knowledge. Those are topics, again, that are very important, and they need to be represented in a narrative way. And finally, nutrition. Nutrition, we are, convinced that it's very important. Shakuntalas is the lead, along with Dave, on this cluster. And an example of the questions we aim to answer is what is the distribution of nutritional benefits by income and poverty status? But there's many other questions that we have identified. Now, last week, as we presented this, we wanted also to be very explicit of how an author's involvement will have an impact. The goal of this study is to be the basis of a report that will be presented at COFI, the Committee of Fisheries, which is the highest global platform at the UN level, and it happens every 2 years, as you might know, and the next one is in 2020. So authors will be acknowledged for their contribution to the report, but equally importantly is the elaboration of standardized methodologies that can be used in the future as well. So authors' contributions or influence can be in terms of methodology, not only on the results of the study. Authorship, as I mentioned, and opportunities for further collaboration as particularly with the global synthesis data that we will be producing. So hopefully this gives you a little bit more sense of what this study is about. But as I mentioned, we're here today and maybe tomorrow. And if you have any other questions, feel free to contact us and we can talk more. Thank you very much.